All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Conservatish episode 162. My name is Peter Feliciano. Wherever you're listening, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you share this with your less offendable friends. And you can find me on Instagram at Peter_Feliciano and on TikTok for now at Conservatish. And our guest today is the wonderful Dr. Shelby Steele. Thank you so much for taking the time today, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So first things first, people can find your new film, What Killed Michael Brown, at whatkilledmichaelbrown.com. And where else can they find it?
Vimeo, and it was up on Amazon for a little while, but we that remains unresolved at the moment. So it may be there again. We're not sure, but
right.
It was briefly it was there.
Yeah.
But you can't get it at Vimeo and whatkilledmichaelbrown.com.
Yes. And also they can find that on Twitter, on Instagram, and follow the updates and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I saw that there was some issues with Amazon and all that stuff. It's annoying. Yeah. I find
goes on.
Yes, and it's always a for me. So I started a TikTok account because I'm such a millennial a few months ago, 4 or 5 months ago, and very quickly gained 10,000 followers. And then I posted something that must have pissed off the algorithm because even though my videos were averaging about 10,000 views sometimes, I posted something, they took it off, I appealed, and then now my video views get about 25 on average, even though I have 10,000 followers. So it's a powerless feeling, and I'm sure you guys are dealing with that on Amazon as well.
Yeah. That's it.
Tech overlords. George Carlin, the comedian, you know who George Carlin is. Never mind. George Carlin, when he was talking about liberals, he said, "It's Big White Daddy knows best. Big White Daddy knows best. It's the big. I know what's best for these people to see and to hear and to know and to discuss."
Yeah, you got that right.
And speaking of discussion, I watched your film. It's beautiful. It's heavy. And you were the writer and creator of it, and your son is the director. Give us a brief synopsis of the film.
Well, we just wanted to look at this event of a Black youth being shot and killed by a white policeman has become a kind of almost an archetype. It repeats Trayvon Martin, Freddie Gray, Eric Garner, Michael Brown. And in Michael Brown's case, the discrepancy between the facts and the storyline, the narrative that people told about the incident was so different, so vastly different. We thought that that might be a good place to focus in on the forces in play regarding race in America, and what was really going on, and why this, I call it a poetic truth, where you sort of take a license with reality to create a storyline that serves your power in some way. And part of the explosiveness of the Michael Brown story, it seemed to me to have a lot to do with that. This we'll take this event and we'll turn it into power, and all sorts of people flood into Ferguson, Missouri, and to do that. So it seemed to have within it all the sort of themes and ideas that come out of Black-white relations in America today.
Yeah, it's a very heavy film, and the case of Michael Brown I hadn't really thought about for years. I don't even know if I did very much research. I know when I first started to change my mind on just being an automatic liberal, because I think what's that old saying, if you're not liberal when you're 25 you're heartless, and if you're not conservative when you're 35 you're mindless.
Right.
I'm 34, and a couple of years ago I voted for.
Well, I'm going to get you a high chair.
Okay. Yeah. so a couple years ago, after the 2016 election, I had voted for Bernie and Hillary, and I just had these assumed beliefs. Of course, I want a woman's right to choose, and of course, I'm against this, and of course, there's a hipsterness along with white liberal politics that, of course, when I started to do my research, Alton Sterling was one of the times where okay, let me really sit down, watch the hard videos, do the hard research, and I was like, this is not cut and dry. This is not, and I hadn't thought about Michael Brown's case in a while. But it was an interesting way to start off that starting point, because rather than take, okay, George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or any of these ones this year, you're looking at the basis of the jumping off place for the Black Lives Matter organization.
Right.
And that's a smart, but it's also it's a bold thing to do, to say that, hi, everybody at the Black Lives Matter organization or the sympathizers, I'm questioning the whole basis of your, I'm questioning, and people who do that, like you, with this movie and with your talks and with your books, are always kind of artistic or whatever, some sort of North Star for me. I'm mixed race as well. I'm half Puerto Rican, a little bit English and German and Black on the other side, and so the identity politics thing really irks me. Not just because I wouldn't get to have a say about things 45% of the time because of my 45% whiteness, but also it bothers me because I know humans and I know how complicated we are. And I know how, not just that, there are 41 million Black Americans, and that's 41 million different experiences, 41 million different perceptions of those experiences, 41 million emotions elicited by those, and therefore reactions. And
Indeed.
And your family specifically came from very overt racism, overt segregation, overt oppression, and if you could give a little bit of your background regarding it.
Well, yes, I also am biracial. We didn't have that term when I was when I was growing up. I was probably over 30 before I really began to hear that idea. That's a story in itself. But yeah. my parents met as founding members of CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, in the early 40s in Chicago. And so I grew up as a CORE baby, very much a part of the whole civil rights movement. When Martin Luther King first came on the scene, the Montgomery boycotts, in my kitchen table, we were worried whether or not he really had the stuff. Was he going to make it or not? And CORE was part of his brain trust, and went down and it sort of actually enlightened him in certain ways, for which he was always grateful. People like Bayard Rustin and James Farmer and so forth. So I grew up in that milieu, and on the south side of Chicago, segregated world. My parents organized the neighborhood. They closed down the local school, which was segregated. The one I went to, we were all Black. There was a white school a few blocks away, was all white, and the twain never met. They ended that. They closed that school and so forth. So they were, the whole business of race in America was something, again, a milieu that I sort of grew up in, and I read James Baldwin in the 7th grade, and I was sort of on my way to thinking about those things. So that's my background. Again, on the South Side, and so race for me was on the level of an identity. Identity was a simpler thing in those days, in the 50s and the 60s and into the 70s. You were Black or you were white. That was it. And so if you had one drop, we all lived by the one drop rule. And then that was over with, and now I look back, there's kind of something a little comfortable in that. Identity was not a big thing in those days. It was not, blackness was, I remember talking to my father about blackness when I was in high school, and he would say, well, what is that? Now, this is a man born in the deep South, third grade education, self-made, taught himself to read and write. The archetype of the black of the Great Migration and so forth.
Right.
And yet he didn't know what the word identity meant, that there was such a thing as black identity. Blackness made no sense. It was a new 1960s idea. And we're still, I think, plagued by it. Which, by the way, I think we are plagued by it because we fell into the terrible habit in the 1960s of looking for power through our identity.
Right.
More than through ourselves.
Right.
And I was fortunate to come along at a time when your contribution to your race was your own self-development. Become somebody, become who you are, find what you love, pursue it, make a life, and that your life then will contribute to the whole, to the group. There was no idea that your blackness itself would mean anything, would help you in any way, would do the work that you were supposed to be doing.
Right.
So it was a tragic, I think, mistake that we're still very much plagued by, this idea that identity has meaning and power. And in fact, whenever we use identity for power, corruption of some kind will follow, I believe.
Yeah.
It's an idea I long to see fade away. I believe ultimately, in the long run, it will. Because there's nothing there. There's no real substance there.
Right. In fact, I mean, you can look back at the Bolsheviks versus you can look back at all the history when it comes to that's them and that this is us.
Right.
Eventually they will weed out. One of the things that really bothered me after George Floyd's killing and all the posts was all the white people on Facebook and Instagram and whatever, who were saying things like white people need to shut up. White people need to sit down. White people don't get to have a say. It's so simple. Just listen to black people. And I would, through my travels and, through my show, it's conservatish. So I do have a lot of conservatives on, and I've had many black conservatives on. And I'm like, why aren't you listening to them? Like, why aren't the black voices that are Shelby Steele or Thomas Sowell or Larry Elder, why aren't they being elevated? There's a very selective. And exactly like what you're saying, when we're trying to get power based on our identity, the only thing that can really, it dooms voices like yours that don't fit in the box. They're going to have to get rid of them one way or another. And Amazon is an example of that. Instagram,
That's right. That's right.
When you look at,
people like me step on their power, their power. They feel their power, and this is one of the terrible things that came out of the 60s. Our victimization, our history of victimization became our moral authority in society. And our moral authority is power. So if I have moral authority over you and I say, well, you're of that race that once oppressed me and so forth, then you have to listen. And I'm in charge. So it's almost always about power.
right.
The problem is that for blacks, it's fruitless. It gets you nowhere. Our problem is again, it's not racism. Our power is underdevelopment. You come out of 4 centuries of oppression, you're going to be underdeveloped.
Right.
There's no way it could be otherwise. And that is Now that we have moved into freedom, which I believe we truly have, then we need to, the development is it's about us joining modernity, the modern world. It's not about us going off in an enclave of blackness. That's death. There's no future there. We have to join the modern world, and you can only join the modern world, modernity, for the most part, as an individual.
Right.
You know, groups are, as Ralph Ellison puts it, groups are the sum of individuals. We have to get back to that model. If you want to help Blacks get ahead in this world, become somebody.
Right.
As an individual.
And one of the things you talk about in the movie is how it already was happening post-slavery, before the 60s, between 1940 and 1960, Black poverty nationally went from 87% poverty to 47% poverty without the government help. You know, the Blacks were already getting success and getting, you know, foundation. We're already getting homes. We're already, you know, in less than a generation. So it is.
Yeah.
So a couple of ways we could get. So obviously you worked on in the civil rights movement, and one of the things that I've there's an insufferability, I would like to say, about modern I usually say it in much worse, more blue language, but I'll just say it's insufferability. About modern activism from progressives. When you look back at yourself, when you were doing the actual work during actual oppression, but do you find any of that insufferability or closed-mindedness or any of the characteristics that you see in current progressive liberal activism? Do you see that in yourself back in the day?
You know, no. I mean, it was liberalism was a very different, back at that point, when I was growing up in a segregated Black community just off the south side of Chicago, and there were other ones all around. Chicago was a destination for Blacks from the South and so forth. So it was a Black world. And it was also segregated. There was no illusion that you were going to do. There was going to be a lot of interchange with the larger society. So the focus was pretty much on everybody as an individual. And you were expected, religion was important. There was a sense of community, and there was a sense of family life. In my neighborhood, everybody had a father. He might not be the most perfect person that ever lived, but he was there. Families were there. The family 2 doors down, the son was Melvin Van Peebles, who later on created independent film in the United States of America. Next door to him was Mary Berry, who became a television star. These were all poor people. They were not wealthy people, and one became the head of the FBI for the Western United States. I mean, I could just go on from this little poor. The pride, the culture at that point focused on individual achievement, individual development. And you were, as my father would say, when I went to an integrated high school finally, you pick the smartest kid in the class. That's your role model. That's the one you follow. Well, I don't care what his color is.
Right.
That's who you're competing with. And that was the attitude. After the 60s, when whites became guilty, when they confessed to all this bad history, then that gave Blacks, that meant that we were going to finally get power out of our race. I can remember in high school them saying that, they're going to have affirmative action someday, where you get to college just because you're Black, because of the color of your skin, because of your identity, not because you earned it. Well, when I was coming along, I missed affirmative action. It was just a little bit behind me, but right away. And today, blacks have the lowest grade point average, the highest dropout rate of any group in American universities.
Mm.
After 60 years of affirmative action. Because what happened when, again, one of my main points, white guilt, the need for whites for their innocence, meant that they took over black problems. They're going to build a big housing project, Pruitt-Igoe. They're going to give school busing. They're going to more welfare payments, Great Society, war on poverty. They take the agency for your fate out of your hands. And so all blacks could do at that point was manipulate whites.
Right.
And get their way, they can move ahead that way. Right. So we then created very quickly an underclass. And of people completely dysfunctional that simply were not there before. So again, at any rate, it's the idea that has corrupted us is that our victimization is our power in the world. And if you want to make many blacks angry, just say you're not a victim.
Right.
You have a fight on your hands.
Right.
Because we have just sort of infused that idea into our life and culture that we are victims and that we are entitled and that's our way ahead, and that's killing us. It's drawing. We produce generation after generation after generation. It gets weaker rather than stronger.
Right.
I know us to be a very strong people, very strong people. The people I grew up with were serious people, and were on their way up. Though, as like my father, they were poor, but they were on their way up, and many moved up, and many did well. But the 60s was a corrupting decade for us in many ways, hurt us badly. Right. As badly as racism did, maybe worse.
Right. Yeah. One of the things you talk about was that it's more insidious. The liberal racism is more insidious. It's more, they want your soul rather than just, your body.
Yes, they want it all, and they want you to manifest their innocence, their goodness, their greatness.
Right.
You are a means to that. Well, that's killed us. That's just you give away your soul, then that's there's nowhere to go.
And it's amazing how shallow it is. It's amazing how quickly they'll turn when all these whites who were saying after George Floyd, white people need to shut up, just listen to black people. And then I would share a black conservative voice, or here's a black Trump fan, or I interviewed a guy who has lived most of his life in dirty Detroit, and yet is against the Black Lives Matter organization and has been shot at, not because he did anything wrong, but because he was in a group of people near somebody who was getting shot at, and yet he's vocal against the Black Lives Matter organization. All of a sudden, very quickly, those white liberals who are just, everyone needs to be quiet and listen to blacks, all of a sudden they're like, that guy doesn't speak for them. Or, one was, one bleeding heart liberal called the mother of Trayvon Martin an Uncle Tom and a clown. Like, how quickly they'll switch, how quickly all of a sudden, no, I'm speaking up. Those aren't the real blacks. Like, how dare you? How dare you? The gall on these people.
Indeed.
Yeah, and what do you feel like is the main impetus behind it? I think, like you said, as far as the organizationally, as far as maybe it might be a bit conspiracy theorist. I think the majority of the powers that be, it really is to dismantle the nuclear family. They weren't lying about that. They weren't hiding that until a couple of weeks ago, like Black Lives Matter and the Democrats' thirst for money. But I feel, and I could be wrong, but I feel like part of it is the white guilt for sure, but then also it's the there's a comedian, Patrice O'Neill, who used to talk about when a bully gets your money today, he doesn't come back tomorrow and say, hey, thanks for the money, I'm all good today. He says, give me more money, right? Because there's an unquenchable thirst in bulliness. And how do bullies get created? They don't come out of wonderful lives. They've been usually bullied themselves. So if there's a gaping vacuum inside of Blacks or people who feel like they've been wronged or they've been oppressed or are continuously, there's never gonna, and it's same thing with the protesters, even after the beginning, who was the Ferguson Market kept trying to make the protesters happy. There's never there's an unending list of demands. So I feel like it's partially white guilt on the white liberals' part, and I also think it's bulliness on the Black protesters' part. How do we stop the machine, from your perspective, going forward?
Well, that's the relevant question. How do we do that? I've learned over a lifetime that when you're talking about race, the only way that we do a lot of things, certainly in America, and we're a wealthy society, and I think a good society. We've wrestled with these problems. We've made progress only when we found courage.
Okay.
And right now, if you're white, for example, then the common sense is, well, I'm not gonna get near the race issue. Right? If you're Black, you say, I don't want to be seen as an Uncle Tom. I want to be a down brother. I don't want. And so we lose courage. We don't have the courage to be who we really are. Mm. And because we're so intimidated by what we're going to be, how we're going to be seen, and so forth. In the civil rights era, when I grew up, the use of the King movement began slowly to build. When, again, in my family, we were a little bit ahead of the curve. My father would go around and ask people to come to the demonstrations, and they'd say, Mr. Steele, you're gonna get us in trouble. We'd appreciate it if you stopped that. That was common. Most Blacks were that way. Mm. The idea now, of course, in revisionism is that Blacks were all angry. No. They had to be persuaded, pleaded with, and finally, though, here's my point. Finally, they found the courage to say, okay, I don't care what my white employer does once or whatever. I'm going to fight because I can't take this segregation anymore. It's over. Right. When we found the courage, the world around us could see, oh my goodness, they're not like they used to be. They find they're not going to take it anymore. The world changed. It's the same way today. We're going to come to a realization soon where we're going to have to accept the fact that our problems we face today as Blacks no longer has anything to do with racism and with whites. It has to do with us, that we have not taken responsibility enough to develop and compete with everybody else in the world. Mm. And that we have to become competitive. We've already won freedom. We've already got everything protest is going to give. Now we have to have self-development. And I think at some point we'll get tired of suffering, and we'll find courage, and we'll say, I'm going to make sure my child can read and write by the 4th grade. Because if they can, they probably have a decent life. If they can't, doesn't look good for them. I'm going to make sure that happens. I'm not going to rewrite history and all of that. I'm going to make sure my kid can read and compete with other kids. I'm going to insist on it. If I have to move out of this neighborhood and find another place, I will do that. I will do whatever it takes. Those old-fashioned traditional they're not glamorous, but they work,
Right.
and successful people do that. Well, again, I think the time is I don't think it's that far away. I think there's beginning to be the ear is opening up,
Right.
and we're beginning to understand that we are free and that we do have opportunities.
Right. One of the things I've been thinking about, besides just all of the Black conservatives on my show, I mean, I just started the show to be able to rant and joke freely, but also to humanize conservatives. I feel like part of my fight is to have a number of people and continue to hold up the mirror to the identity politicians and say, like, no, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't fit in the box. You know, wake up, wake up, wake up. But I also feel that after this election, how many, like if they, I mean, even in 2016, yes, Hillary won the popular vote, but the actual vote, it was a duly elected, Trump is a duly elected president, love him or hate him, it happened. And one of the things I've been talking about as we're getting closer is, yes, I do not want Biden to win, and Kamala, let's be real. But if they do, I'm not gonna move. I'm not gonna cry. I'm not gonna throw a tantrum in the streets. I'm gonna wait patiently to be ready to say I told you so. But other than that, I'm not gonna, throw a tantrum. And
Right.
if the Black vote, because there's been a huge wave of Black voters who are, or at least in the polls, who are saying, yeah, no, I don't want Biden and Kamala either. You know what I mean? There's a rising number that don't want the regular feeding that the Democrats have been feeding them.
Yeah.
So what percentage, needs to, if the Black vote, I think was 8% for Trump in 2016, if it's 40, if it's 35% for Republican,
revolutionary.
yeah. But how are we going to help these white liberals like pay attention to that 35% and say, how about their voice? Does their voice get a point?
Well, interestingly, I think they'll listen because their fate in many ways rests on the Black vote. If liberals lose the Black vote, they're out of the game. That's been their advantage for God knows almost since the 60s. Is that they could always count on that Black vote. Well, it's beginning to fray a little bit. That's the thing I'm probably most interested in this election is how much of that Black vote goes over to the Trump side, the new side. What are we looking at there? If a significant number goes there, Trump will win. If a significant number of Blacks does not go there, Trump will lose. Blacks control this election and have a big impact now on our whole electoral process. So the fight for their loyalty, for their is both parties have it's amazing. Biden has to get a Black and got to get a woman. He's got. I mean, they don't mess around. They play identity politics to the bitter end. They're life and death, and that's all ugly to me and dangerous. It seems to me to be for the Black people, because again, we've got to begin to think of ourselves in individual terms, and vote for people who reflect what my individual personal values are, what my career goals are, all that sort of thing.
Right.
I think more and more Blacks are going to get there. I really do. I think we've been on the plantation, as we call it, and we had the good times, whatever, or seemed to, whatever they were. That's over, and the only way it seems to me now. What bodes well, I think, for Black America today is that many Blacks are peeling away from that old, rigid democratic machine, that old idea that victimization is our power, that we're entitled, and that we have to get justice. We have this whole, that paradigm, it seems to me, is really getting weak, and I began to write these things 30 some years ago, and there's a big difference already. It's taken longer than I would like, but
Yeah.
there's an openness there now that was not there before. I'm happy to see that.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for your work. I mean, I can't imagine how difficult it would have been then versus now, and just internally, and when I started realizing I wasn't as liberal as I thought I was, it was like, it was freeing, but it was also like, oh no, I'm gonna have to face all this stuff. I'm gonna have to face, confrontation. I'm gonna have to have uncomfortable conversations, and
I lost every single friend I had when I began to publish and was identified 30 years ago, when I was identified as a Black conservative. I didn't even know what a conservative meant at the time, but I lost every single friend. And I gained many, and have never felt better. It's nice to be free.
Yes, it is.
To carry that burden of having to pretend all the time that I'm liberal about this had gotten too much.
Right.
And so it was liberating. And
anyway,
count myself lucky.
Yeah, and we're very grateful. I'm very grateful, for your work. And
Thank you.
and I hope people go, and I have to let you go, unfortunately, but I hope that people go watch this movie. It's a heavy movie. But it's a really, I hate to say, like, it's important when it comes to art, but like this one really is. Like, this one really is. It was shocking and moving, and you did it in a very careful way, which was nice. And you, just as a side note too, I'm a musician. You used great music. Like, that jazz in there was delicious, man. I gotta say.
Thank you. He'll be happy to hear that.
Good. So yeah,
telling me over here that I have to.
Yes, you do.
With my next.
Yeah, I'm gonna let you go, but I really appreciate it. Everybody go to whatkilledmichaelbrown.com and look for it on Vimeo, as well as hopefully Amazon soon.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Doctor. Have a wonderful day.
Well, you too.
All right. Bye-bye.